The NFL trade deadline is just 2 weeks away. Will the Dallas Cowboys make a trade? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are answering your mailbag questions, including, are the Cowboys considering a soft tank? Who are our favorite 2025 head coaching candidates? But first, Landon, let's get to all the questions. I had about 7 or 8 questions that asked us about the Dallas Stars and the Dallas Mavericks and what we think about them this year. We're going to say that for the other Locked On Network shows, but I get it. I understand. Yeah. I understand. This question comes from Gary. He wants to know, do you think the Cowboys will make any moves via trade this season, or is this the current roster that we're going to see all year?
You and I were just talking before the show that obviously we all heard Jerry come out and say that he wasn't necessarily going to be taking any kind of, I mean, I don't even know how he phrased it, but he said, the question was basically asked, are there any trades on the horizon or anything that you can make an improvement? And Jerry kind of flatly denied that sort of thing. But you and I both kind of tend to agree that probably is more in the realm of like the big splash trade.
The Amari Cooper trade, right?
That's right. Yeah. I do think that they are probably out on that because of the things that we've talked about previously, like the fact that this kind of really does feel like a soft rebuild year. And I mean, we'll talk about more of that later. But I think that they're not necessarily looking to give up big time assets, especially draft assets, to take on players, especially players that have big contracts, right? Because it kind of double defeats the purpose of trying to get younger while wiping off some of the dead money off of your books. So I don't think that you're going to get like a situation, like we said, like an Amari Cooper, a top end guy, someone that you're trading your first round pick for. But if you could trade a mid-round pick for a starting level defensive tackle or defensive end potentially at this point, especially someone that, is maybe younger or has a couple of years left, or someone that you would be interested in potentially having long-term or maybe for a couple more years. Or the other way is if they were on a big contract and all their guarantee money is gone, and maybe you can get like a cheap rental for 2 years that you can trade for a mid-round pick. I think that those are both like viable options for the Cowboys if they are just trying to kind of incrementally improve the roster while also potentially planning for the future and not disrupting their kind of cap and draft asset plans for whatever rebuild situation they're trying to work towards to 2025.
Yeah, and I'll add another position. I think running back is a spot where they can flip the pick, right? Maybe for, somebody who was on the last year of his deal. I'm not saying this player specifically, but like Najee Harris from the Steelers is on the final year of his deal. Yeah. His 5th-year option has declined. Maybe you flip a 5th-round pick for a running back to just help you throughout the rest of the season. I did want to point this out. As of right now, according to Tankathon and according to Over the Cap, the Cowboys have 10 picks for next year's draft, including 4 picks in the 5th round. Right now, those picks would be 153, 169, 170, 171. I mean, you're just probably not going to keep 10 players you drafted. We saw that this year, right? Like Justin Rogers, who they drafted in the 7th round, didn't make the roster. Nate Thomas, who they drafted in the 6th or 7th round, didn't make the roster. Last year, Junior Fajoku was a 4th-round pick and probably shouldn't have made the roster. So if you want to flip 1 or even 2 of those 5th-round picks for somebody that helps you this year, I'm not opposed to that at all.
Yeah, the name I think Joey Ikes has been, floating around here lately is Dalvin Tomlinson.
Yep, that's a really good one. Yep.
I don't know if you can get him for like a 5th, but maybe you could sweeten it a little bit, right? But because
maybe you give up a 4th and a 5th, and you get back a 6.
Yeah, and maybe you can have some conditional aspects to that.
Yep.
Cleveland's kind of seemingly in a fire sale a little bit. They just finished trading Amari Cooper to the Bills, so maybe they'll do something similar with Dalvin Tomlinson, who I'm pretty sure has not played. I mean, I think he's only played a little bit because he's been dealing with an injury situation, if I'm not mistaken. But I think he's healthy now. So
Cleveland also has a defensive tackle that they drafted in the second round this year,
right.
Michael Hall, who was suspended the first 5 games. He's back now, so they're a little crowded at the defensive tackle spot.
So there are some guys out there that maybe you can make smaller trades for, I think, that are still kind of not going to put your overall 2025 plans at risk, and that potentially could work as both a improvement for this season and potentially someone to consider part of your building plans for 2025.
Yeah. So in fact, I would go as far as to predict that the Cowboys will make a trade. I know Jerry said they're not going to. I just bet that they're not going to go into next year's draft with 10 picks. It seems excessive. I think they're going to move one of those for some player that can help at least make them a little bit more competitive this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just diversifying your assets a little bit, right? You have these 5th round picks. I think the odds that you're going to have 5 players available to you in the 5th round that are all better than one veteran that you could potentially trade one of those 5th round picks for is not likely. So right. I think it's when you have all that excess capital in the draft area, obviously they're trying to build more, and they're trying to that's part of what the soft rebuild is. But I also think that using those assets in different ways, if a situation comes up and it makes sense for you long term, and it aligns with your needs for this year and for next year, again, I wouldn't necessarily do this for a 1-year rental of a 35-year-old player necessarily, because that doesn't make a lot of sense, kind of team building timeline wise. But if you can get a younger player who's maybe on the end of a deal that that you could rent for a couple of years, or a guy that you would actually be interested in re-signing maybe after his contract expires, I think that this is something that's worth exploring, especially at those positions like defensive tackle and running back where they absolutely need upgrades. Like, it makes sense to not wait to make those upgrades, or at least have this be part of the upgrade process, so you're not getting into the draft and desperately having to double dip at running back and defensive tackle because your needs there are so strong.
And we've seen under Will McClay in this front office that they are willing to make these trades. They made one for Jonathan Hankins. They made the Stephon Gilmore and the Brandon Cooks trades in the offseason, but in season they traded for Michael Bennett 1 year, and actually Bennett was pretty decent for them.
That's right.
I wouldn't be surprised if they make some sort of move like that. That's, hey, it's a 5th round pick. Who cares? We still have 3 others. Like, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the positions that we're talking about are eminently tradable positions too. I think, if you're trying to get a nose tackle, not like a pass rushing defensive tackle, I think those are the kind of guys that if teams have a spare one of those, they'd be willing to flip for a low round pick.
Any other positions worth not thinking about corner? Would you add another corner, or is that just about getting healthy at corner?
I think at this point you're so close to getting Bland back, potentially Carson as well. I think you kind of ride out with what you've got there. And honestly, I don't think that the guys that you had in there have played terribly necessarily. That hasn't been the main source of your issues. So I think you just kind of see what you've got in Bland, and you've already got a lot of money invested in there. Let's see those guys play and get them healthy.
Last one. What about wide receiver? Would you consider flipping a day 3 pick for maybe somebody with a high pedigree like Treylon Burks, who has kind of fallen out of favor in Tennessee, or Marvin Mims, who's not playing for the Broncos? Like, is that appealing to you at all?
Sort of, but I think it really would have to be the right guy. Like, I don't necessarily want another yak receiver that isn't a route runner, because we're having problems getting the guys open on the routes that we're running right now. Right. So I would like more of a separator type, but I don't know that the kind of wide receiver that you'd want to get is going to be available at the price that you'd be willing to pay.
Probably not. All right, let's talk about a soft tank job by the Dallas Cowboys. What would that look like? We'll discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a CJ Stroud rookie card or a Patrick Mahomes rookie card just isn't in the cards. Like, I love collecting, but that is some serious money to drop. I can only do like $20, $30 packs here and there. But thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that I listed was hit from a pack on Arena Club slab packs drops. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. I've used Arena Club several different times. I hit a really nice Jahmyr Gibbs rookie card PSA 10. It's absolutely fantastic. It's so much fun. They are revolutionizing the repack game. You're going to know immediately what the potential ceiling is, what the floor is for every single pack. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL. That is arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code LockedOnNFL for 10% off your first purchase. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. I absolutely love Game Time. It's the only ticketing app that I use when I want to go to my favorite live events and see my favorite teams. Game Time now has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite teams and live events even easier than ever before. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite thing about Game Time is they'll give you a panoramic view of your seats before you buy. Yeah, I've told you guys this before, but I love sitting in the end zone, but I don't want to sit where the goalpost is in my way. I like to either be right in the middle of the goalpost or just off to the side a little bit. With Game Time, you're going to be able to see exactly what your seats look like before you buy. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LockedOnNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LockedOnNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering your mailbag questions, but we want to let you know that if you're in the DFW area, make sure that you check out Landon on WFAA at 11 a.m. Central Time on Fridays. He does a hit for them every single week. Always great content, Landon. You do a very, very good job. I actually have a friend that lives in Dallas, and they said, man, Landon's gotten really, really good at those hits.
So, hey, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Yeah. Let's get to another question from @Jones's Babysitter, a longtime listener of the show. He wants to know, you and Landon consistently talk about a soft rebuild, but what about a soft tank? Are there players on this team that you would be willing to trade to build up a draft day war chest?
I wanted to say I broad gesturally towards what's happening currently as the soft tank. No, but I think that there is a difference between a soft rebuild and a soft tank. I think a soft tank is more severe, and I think Jerry's babysitter mentioned it perfectly. Like, I think that that's the kind of thing you start talking about. Instead of being a buyer in the trade market, you're a seller in the trade market. You're trying to further get your hands on more picks. Look, I think there's been a lot of talk, as the Cowboys have kind of had bad times of potentially trading someone like Micah Parsons to see like what kind of bounty you can get. I think things like that are well beyond soft tanking at that point, right? Like, I mean, you're tanking at that point if you're trading away your best defensive player and don't have necessarily a plan to replace it. I think that's a hard take. So I do think that a soft tank would be. I mean, I don't know how different it would be than what we've seen in some ways, right? Like, kind of ignoring some of the stuff that needs to be fixed, as opposed to being a little more frugal to kind of keep your powder dry. Like, that's what it feels like, especially now that you have the rule that allows you to roll over cap space from one year to the other. I think, that's why you see the Cowboys kind of keeping their powder dry. I think right now they've got somewhere in the area of like 20, what is it? I had it right here. It's like $22 million in cap, right? Yeah. They also happen to have currently $22 million in dead money on their cap this year.
Yeah.
That goes down to $9 million next year. As of right now, obviously that could change if the Cowboys cut any more players, but they also get to roll over the $22 million or whatever that current cap is into next season. So I think the idea is to create more cap space next year because you are going to have to sign more of these players. You are going to have to sign Micah Parsons, who I don't think they're trading. You are going to have to sign potentially Oso DiMarco if you want to bring him back, or some of these guys. So you need to create cap space. I think if you're soft tanking, you're doing that. Plus, you're trying to create draft capital as well. Like, I think that's when you start trading away low-hanging fruit to kind of in exchange for. That's when like guys like Oso DiMarco become more valuable as a third-round pick trade than as a player on your roster currently. That's when you start doing stuff like that.
So I have 3 names that I've written down that I think would have trade value. Like maybe not a ton of trade value, but like I think teams would be interested in. We'll go through them. So you mentioned the first one, Oso DiMarco, right? Now he's not playing extremely well this year.
No, that's true.
So I don't know what you get into a trade, but what makes this hard, Landon, is you would need to get back in a trade something that is very comparable to what you're going to get as a compensatory pick for Osa next year, right?
That's right.
I think Osa is going to get somewhere between 18 and 23 million a year in free agency next year. That's probably a 4th round comp pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is somebody going to give you a 4th round pick right now to rent Osa for the remainder of the year? I don't think, as much as we like him, I don't know if that's realistic.
Yeah, I mean, look, interior pass rushers are valuable, but I think you're right. Like, he's especially the way he's played so far this year hasn't been great. I think it's hard to imagine that someone is going to, like you said, it'd be different if it was last year, right? Like he had a 2 years deal, but this is truly a rental on, what 10 games left, 11 games left. So I think that would be one of the hard, even though that name makes sense. You're right. The contract makes it a little bit more difficult.
And I know people are listening to this. Well, why would he get 18 to $23 million in free agency if he's not even worth a 4th round pick in a trade? It's because teams are very hesitant to give up top 150 picks for players that they know are only going to be there for a couple of games. Now, not saying it couldn't happen. No. I think of the 3 names, that's probably the one that's the most intriguing. But just remember, the Cowboys would need to get something that's comparable to a comp pick. So that's why I don't think it gets done. Now, if you want to get bigger hauls, Landon, what about Jake Ferguson? There are teams across the NFL that could really use a tight end that are contenders. I think the Chargers are one that could really use a tight end to help their passing attack. Ferguson has not played as well this year as he did last year, but do you view Ferguson as a long-term solution for the Cowboys, like somebody they would like to lock up? Or is this another Dalton Schultz thing where you draft him, maybe you franchise him for a year and then you move on?
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know, like, if what we've seen, I think we would have needed to seen a little bit more from him this year before I would have said this is a non-tradable player. This is, I think that if you're going to trade him, this is one of the guys that I want to be a little more wowed like by the deal to kind of give him away, because I do think he does have long-term upside here. I think the connection between him and Dak is real. I think he does the things that you want in the tight end on this team to do well. He's a decent blocker. He runs the seam route very well. So I do think I'm not saying I wouldn't trade him at all, but I think that this is one of those players that I feel like I almost would need to be kind of wowed.
So let's say it's the Colts. I'm just picking a team. Okay. The Colts offer you a 2nd round pick for Jake Ferguson. It's probably on the higher end of what you would get. Would you do it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Okay, I love Jake Ferguson. I think, but a 3rd is really what I was thinking. Like, okay, I think if someone offered me a 3rd, I would very much consider it. Right. Like, I just think that's the value you're probably going to get from him at this point. You've got some tight ends on the roster already. Maybe you start giving, some Stevens a little bit more run. He hasn't even been active yet this year. So you start kind of training some of those younger guys, Brevin Spanford, obviously Schoonmaker. So yeah, I think a 3rd round pick, if you're in this kind of, rebuild mode and you're actually trying to do that, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. This next one's a little harder. And actually it's a twofer. The Cowboys are going to have to make a decision pretty quickly on Deron Bland versus Trayvon Diggs. There's just no way they're going to be able to keep 2 premier cornerbacks when you're also paying the league's highest paid defensive player in the league, the 2nd highest paid receiver, and then the highest paid quarterback. Would you consider moving Trayvon Diggs or Deron Bland?
I would. Yes, I would consider moving one of those two. And I think it depends on the deals for each.
The hard part with Bland is like he hasn't played this year, right?
Yeah,
and I think teams are always very nervous about trading for injured players.
Yeah, that's fair.
But
I also think that the thing that's
contract.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I think that's what makes this a very difficult kind of thing, right? Is that they have very different contracts. They're at different spots in their careers. One of them is healthy, one of them is injured. So I do think that like trading those two, you might get wildly different offers for them. So I think you'd have to kind of see exactly what the situations were and weigh them individually. But it's not like I would say, oh, give me a 4th round pick for either one of those guys. Like I think it's specific to their specific situations.
Just in a vacuum, if you're going to trade one of them, I'm not telling you like who's going to get more in a trade, but if you had to move on from one of them, which one would you move on from?
I think it's Bland. I just think that there's a chance that Bland signs a really big deal, and I think I believe in Diggs's long-term floor better than I believe in Bland's, if that makes sense. Like I just wonder if Bland may not be a high variance player. We just don't know yet. He's really young, and what we've seen has been really incredible at times. But I also think that I've seen some of the other side of his game as well, and I think they're actually very similar players. So it is a hard measurement. It's really more about their situation and their contracts more than anything else, I think.
Yeah. My guess is you would get more for Bland because he's on a rookie deal.
Probably.
Whereas Trayvon's got a bigger number. Now, the Cowboys do get some salary cap relief if they move on from Diggs, but I don't know if it's enough that you would want to take a significantly less in draft capital, right?
I don't know if it breaks the tie, if that makes sense. Yeah,
so those are probably the 3 or 4 players, if the Cowboys were in a soft tank or a hard tank, right, that they would move. I don't get the sense, Landon, that they're going to do anything like that. I just don't think they're going to spend any significant assets to try to make this team better before the deadline.
Yeah, I think they may chip away with it if it helps the future a little bit, but I agree. They're not taking big swings to try to win it this year.
All right, let's talk about some head coaching candidates for 2025. I know it's early, but I know a lot of you are kind of curious about what the Cowboys might do there. Let's talk about our favorite options next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. This is a great week to join FanDuel because we've got some awesome NFL games coming up on Sunday, including Lions-Vikings. We've got the Seahawks-Falcons, which is fun, Texans-Packers, and then in the afternoon, that 4:25 game, 49ers and Chiefs. 49ers are only a 1.5 favorites at home against Kansas City. I find that fascinating. So go to FanDuel, make this little parlay, bet $5, and then you're going to get $200 in bonus bets that you can use on all of the games, all of the futures lines, whatever you want on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. Go download that podcast wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Landon, this last question it's a good one from Chris. He wants to know, who is the best, most realistic coaching candidate for the Cowboys in 2025? We know Jerry won't get someone like Ben Johnson. So who is our actual best option?
I don't know. Best option really is like, I think it's tough to gauge, obviously. I mean,
First of all, I want to say, like, I don't think it's Ben Johnson's completely off the table either.
I don't think so either. Yeah. And actually the name that I was going to throw out there was not Ben Johnson, though Ben is incredible and I certainly wouldn't turn away. I think it's Bobby Slowick is who I would go with there. Just because of the team building aspects and some of the other things in his past, I think maybe make him a little bit more viable for the Cowboys if they were going to go the kind of younger candidate. But listen. I mean, let's be very realistic. I think it's unlikely that the Cowboys will go the unexperienced route unless Jerry really changes his tune about how this should go because of the experience that he's had currently, right? I think that you're probably looking at more retread options, right? Like I think Vrabel is out there. I think you have to look at some of these defensive and offensive coordinators that are former head coaches too. Like I don't know if they would give Brian Flores a shot here with everything that's happened in his career previously. I think that's the kind of person you should be looking at. I mean, guys like that haven't gotten their shot, like Eric Bieniemy, or I think that there's lots of names out there for guys. Maybe you're interested in an Aaron Glenn, who
I was going to say. So here's the question: do you think the guy that the Cowboys will hire will have some kind of ties to the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, probably. I mean, no, you know what? Actually, I say that, and I say that frustratingly. But the truth of the matter is that McCarthy didn't have any ties to the Cowboys, really. So maybe the Cowboys, Jerry and Steven, are kind of learning slowly, very, very slowly. And maybe they'll be willing to kind of reach further out of the pocket than normal. I mean, generally, I would say yes. But maybe now that they've kind of broken that spell with McCarthy, they will try again. I hope they do. Like, what I don't want is another kind of, and that's also been my fear. Like I mentioned about them firing McCarthy, early, is that I don't want them to then just decide to pick somebody internally and then it's just the same old thing. So I do hope that they go out and reach for somebody who's completely different and new, because I think it's time to get some different and new blood in here.
Dion?
No. we need a coach.
All right. So
not a recruiter. I mean, that's the thing, is Deion Sanders is a very good recruiter.
Yeah,
right?
I know. I'm joking.
Yeah, I know you are.
I do think the Cowboys are going to be really interested in finding the right head coach, defensive coordinator pairing, right? Like, I think that's the way they need to look at this. And this is why I think your Bobby Slowick one makes sense, because you could get Bobby Slowick and Robert Saleh, who they worked together when they were with the 49ers, right? Like, and that's a pretty good combo. If I told you had Bobby Slowick running your offense and Robert Saleh running your defense, I think you feel pretty good about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And now that you say that, I got really excited about that. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's I think you're right in this, to connect that. I think if the smart way to do this is to hire a young offensive mind and then get a veteran defensive coach.
Yes.
Right. I think that's the way that you get the best return on investment. You hold on to a good play caller for long term, because all the best play callers are now getting head coaching jobs, as we've been talking about. And then on the defensive side, when you have a young head coach, a young offensive coordinator head coach, you want a steady presence. Maybe, like you said, a previous head coach guy that has experience, that can help him, guide him, get him on track, help him with scheduling and all that stuff. Hey, how did you do this when you were a coach?
Yep.
I think it's a formula that makes a lot of sense. It's worked for a lot of other teams. And yeah, I mean, again, a situation where the young offensive coordinator knows the defensive coordinator and has a relationship there, that would also, be a cherry on top.
Well, here's another one, and this one does have ties to the Cowboys. What about like Clint Kubiak for the Saints? I know that Saints offense has struggled a little bit, but Clint comes from the 49ers system. You could grab somebody like Robert Saleh to be your defensive coordinator, and I believe it's Clint's brother is part of the Cowboys scouting staff right now. So, I mean, there are some family connections that I think would make some sense.
I wonder if you're going to get Gary to come out of retirement to potentially be the offensive coordinator for you. So that's what happens nowadays. You get these dads to come in to, coordinate for their sons, right? Like Callahan, right, in Tennessee.
The one that we should mention Belichick, because I know people.
Yeah, we have to.
I'm not opposed to Belichick. However, the question that I would want to know from Bill is who is running the offense, because if the answer, if the names Joe Judge or Matt Patricia come out of his mouth, I'm instantly crossing him right off, right? Like, you can't run an offense that way. If it's Josh McDaniels, I don't love it, but that's at least a viable solution, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I'm not gonna. It's gonna be hard to get me to endorse, hopping into bed with another kind of old head football situation, right? Like
I just can't do it if Patricia and Joe Judge are running.
And that's the thing. Like
that's a non-starter for me.
I'm on board if Belichick wants to like do something new, like come in here and it's Belichick, but hey, let's get some new people in here and let's But I mean, if he's bringing in the old cast of characters from New England, like I mean, the last generation of those guys that were still hanging around with Belichick, it wasn't a great group. Like a lot of the folks had already left, and the ones that were going to be kind of individually good coaches had already left. The remainder of them are all like the Joe Judges and the Matt Patricia that currently don't have jobs because Belichick doesn't have a job. So I just don't want to like be a hiring house for all of Bill Belichick's old football friends if they aren't actually going to make this team better, which they weren't when they were with the Patriots at the end.
And the last thing I want to say, if you're doing all this work to have a soft rebuild and try to get your cap in order, the last thing I want to do is I'll suddenly bring in a short-term solution head coach. And unfortunately, that's Bill Belichick. I would like to try to find, maybe you won't find a Kyle Shanahan, maybe you won't find your Sean McVay, but maybe you find your Matt LaFleur, right? Somebody who gives you a consistent advantage year over year, who's young, who has a lot of energy. I think that's what I would be searching for at this point. Like, try to create something stable that you have an identity for the next several years, not just year in and year out.
I think the hope is that Jerry looks at what Bobby Slotnick did as an offensive coordinator in Houston. They looks what Ben Johnson did as an offensive coordinator in Detroit, and he sees how quickly they were able to get those teams up and running quickly. And then he looks at it and goes, you know what? Maybe my own mortality will allow me enough time to get a younger coach who can maybe take an extra year. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, but they actually get us to where we need to go so that I can live to see another Super Bowl with this team. So that's what I'm hoping, is that he doesn't just think, oh, I've only got a few years left. I got to get a guy who I think can do that now. And so that means a retread coach. That doesn't always mean that, go get the coach that's right for the job, not just the one that you think has experience. So that's why he's going to do it.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Go check out the new Locked On NFL show, 2 shows every single day. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. On tomorrow's show, we're doing a Fix It Friday. How can the Dallas Cowboys fix this team so they can be competitive in 2024? Make sure you tune in for that. We'll see you guys right back here on Friday.